Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. It's been a challenging couple of years for governance and for those who support the governance structure. In a recently released book called Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, Anil Swaroop, who's former coal secretary and of course a former IAS officer, details much of his journey, the challenges, the learnings, and what's happening with some of these key sectors like coal, power, education as well. He joins me now to talk about his experiences and learnings from there.
Thank you so much for joining in, Mr. Swaroop. Another book from you and another one really detailing the life of a civil servant. Um, One gets the sense while going through your book, though, that the more things change, the more they stay similar. Would you agree with that, or would you say that the challenges for a civil servant today, within the current context, have changed considerably?
Fundamental always remain the same. That remains the same. And in any case, if you've read the book, you will discover that as a civil servant, you don't have much of control over set of circumstances, whatever they are. But you have enormous control over yourself. It is you that needs to change rather than the set of circumstances. Because as I said, you have absolutely no control whatsoever. It is more of an academic discussion to discover what the circumstances were 50 years ago and what they are today. Though fundamentally, I believe the undercurrents are the same. Visibly, some of them do change. Some of them become more intense, some are less intense. But by and large, it is fundamentally the human nature that determines everything, whether in your own context or in the context of circumstances. Fundamental human nature remains the same.
Hmm. You have been part of extremely sensitive ministries, Mr. Swaroop, and I'm going to come to them one by one. But I think the one observation of the current dispensation, especially over the last 2 years, has been this shift, shuffle, move philosophy that seems to be happening, where overnight you see someone being shifted, a secretary being shifted from one ministry to the other. There have also been incidents, but possibly from the finance ministry and others, but I know of the finance ministry for sure, where people have chosen to either take premature retirement or step away from their current role because they were dissatisfied with the kind of overnight move that happened when they were handling a particular portfolio. Uh, would you say that is on the rise, and what do you think is feeding that?
I come from the state of UP where this happened quite frequently in any case. And this happened about 20 years ago. We were transferred. I mean, I was transferred thrice in 6 months. But I had a different approach to transfers. And this emanated from what I said earlier, that I have absolutely no control over what the others are going to do to me.
Yeah.
So I remember, if you permit me, I'll give you an incident which is there in my book, where when a chief secretary got very upset at my getting transferred because the minister went and complained to the chief minister, and he asked me, why did you protect that officer, and as a consequence of which you have been transferred? I said, I found it a call of conscience to protect that officer. And as far as transfer is concerned, I look at it differently. Transfers are like death for a civil servant. It is inevitable. It has to happen. So why bother about it? And in any case, I believed in Hindu philosophy. So you'll be born again, you'll be posted somewhere else. Do that job there. Why unnecessarily hassle about transfer? And let me tell you very frankly, once the politicians got to know that it didn't really bother me to transfer, they stopped bothering me with transfers. So it's a question of what the politician perceives of you. If at the end of the book, that's what I say. खुद ही को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे पता तेरी रज़ा क्या है. So it totally dependent on you, and you can actually evolve. I have given a list of more than 50 officers in the book who have lived their life ethically and have succeeded. It's not merely, but these are consequences that you'll have to be prepared for. So if you're not very satisfied with the situation, then it's better to quit that situation. Either you adjust to that situation or you leave that situation. One should not feel unnecessarily worried about it, but that's how life is. Life is not perfect, that you'll find everything good there. The choice is yours. You got to take a call, and that is the choice that a civil servant has. That's the point I'm trying to hammer in my book. There are choices available. Sometimes we don't exercise that choice and suffer. So that's a personal problem. I don't think circumstances need to be blamed. They will keep coming and going. Circumstances will keep changing. But if you are strong and firmly footed on the ground, I don't think it will matter in the long run. In the short run, yes, you'll feel a bit of a discomfort. But over a period of time, you will develop a reputation for yourself that if there is a coal crisis, you will be called to handle it. People know who you are. And then you have the strength to walk out of Prime Minister's office on disagreeing with a particular aspect. and still living with it, not bothered about the consequences. If one were to be shifted, so be it. How? I mean, I don't have a birthright over a particular position in the government. And if someone does believe that, that's where the problem. The problem is in his belief, not the transfer. That in any case has to happen, sometimes more frequently, sometimes less frequently. So the focus totally in my book is what you can do it to yourself. Of course, there are certain aspects. I'm not prescriptive in my book at all. I'm saying this is how I approach the dilemmas that I faced. And over a period of time, these dilemmas though did exist, but they ceased to exist in my mind because I was very clear in my mind what I had to do and face the consequences thereof. The problem arises when you are not clear in your mind as to what.
I know that you said in past interviews, Mr. Swaroop, that you don't think beyond a point it's important which department or which ministry you're with. After a while, it's about man management when you reach a particular position. But I imagine some of the disillusionment comes from that factor, where even externally and internally there is the belief that a certain man or woman, has certain more depth about a particular context, whether it's finance or revenues. Do you think that is a legitimate argument, or is it not?
No, we can argue that on an academic plane. I'm looking at it purely from a practice point of view.
Yeah.
We can have a long discussion whether this is right or this is wrong. To me, what matters is what you think about it. I mean, ethics by definition to me is a very personal value system. And I cannot impose that value system on somebody else. There could be a disconnect between my value system and the one that is being imposed on me. Then I have a choice. Reinhold Niebuhr very clearly said, I mean, I keep telling my colleagues, you are not here to bring about a revolution. You must understand, Lord grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change things that I can, and the wisdom to understand the difference between the two. This is very important. Otherwise, you will get disillusioned in the service. You must draw your boundaries in the service. And having drawn those boundaries, you will gradually discover there's a lot that you can do within that boundary. And very surprisingly, you'll also discover that the boundary starts expanding. The problem is, instead of drawing the boundaries, instead of living within those boundaries, we start discussing things outside our domain, and the disillusionment comes in. None of us is living in a perfect situation where we'll be able to deliver. And I tell my colleagues that if you are a revolutionary, you join the wrong service. You pick up a chhadu and become a politician. Why are you here? If you're here, you have to be within a particular discipline. And my experience tells me that domain, that boundary that you draw for yourself expands like nobody's business. And that is why you're called to handle situations which you have not asked. The problem arises when you start demanding, when you start expecting. If you're not expecting or demanding, you can lead a wonderful life and you can concentrate on yourself. खुद ही को आप उतना बुलंद कर सकते हैं, then people start coming to you for finding solutions. I mean, I have considered it below my dignity to apply for a government job post retirement. I feel that as Secretary Government of India, I should not be going down towards somebody and applying for something. But if the government does ask me to do something, I'm not against it. Yes, even now, number of ministers ring me up, they talk to me. I'm very happy at telling them what I can. But I'm enjoying my freedom outside the government. In the government, there were boundaries there. Now I have no boundaries. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I never thought that post-retirement would be as great as it has turned out to be. I have my freedom. I'm doing what I want to do. And every moment is great. Though, of course, if I were to be born again in the first book I've written, I'd like to be a nice officer all over. Because there's no other service in the world that gives you the opportunity to do the much that you can do, to deliver it to the poorest of the poor. And I jokingly tell people, IS is the only service where you can survive if you're honest. You can thrive if you're honest. You can also survive if you're dishonest. And you can also thrive if you're dishonest. Which service gives you that opportunity? It's an amazing thing. And I also jokingly tell people, which service enables an efficient officer to become Secretary of Government of India? Which service provides the opportunity of an inefficient officer becoming Cabinet Secretary of Government of India? There's no other service. So that be the case, there's no better service than this. It's a question of how you approach things. I mean, I'm a great believer. I have absolutely no control of what others are doing to me, but I have enormous control over myself and I enjoy myself.
That's a fantastic mix of optimism and irony, Mr. Swaroop. Very well laid out. Let me lead you down the very wide arc that you have had professionally, though, because I think you've handled many, many key positions. And I want to start with, when you were Central Provident Fund Commissioner. A recent report indicates that as much as 30,000 crores has been withdrawn from the EPFO. Their own internal targets, as the report suggests, looks at nearly 10 million subscribers, withdrawing from their savings in the coming days. Tell me how you read it, and tell me what kind of support you think should be given to people who are now dipping into what is really their last pot of gold in terms of, getting access to some money.
See, this is very unusual set of circumstances. I don't think anyone would have imagined this would happen.
Yeah.
And it's very natural for the people who are strapped for money, because this is their savings. And what do you do in a time of crisis? You dip into your savings. And that is precisely what has happened. People are dipping into the savings. It's not anybody's making, but it has happened. So they are withdrawing the money, which is very fair. In fact, when I was CPFC, I created this enabling technological arrangement so that a person who wants to withdraw doesn't have to run from pillar to post. You can't imagine till about 10 years ago how difficult it was to withdraw money from the Provident Fund. Now it's become very simple. It's totally technology driven, and I mean, I've not written a chapter. I should have written a chapter in the book. How technology became a major enabler in CPFC to enable what has happened. But it's a very natural consequence of and very unusual happening around us.
Mm. How do you read it, though, Mr. Swaroop, from the government's point of view? Because the thought process also is that this is a time when private investment is collapsing. It's possibly a time when the government needs to really step up in terms of spending, in terms of supporting any kind of consumption, but that's not happening. After what we've seen of the first wave of the pandemic, the government has been quite clear about the fact that it wants to take very, very small measured steps. As someone who might have been in that position, would you have advised differently?
See, let me put myself in the shoes of the Principal Secretary or Secretary of Finance. It's a huge choice that I have to make. Now, the easiest thing to do is to print more money and put it in the market, start things where we put money in the hands. But the problem here is that unless you have the products or the services also being generated simultaneously, it will lead to enormous amount of inflation. Yeah. So that's the balancing act that the government has to do, because inflation hits the poorest of the poor the most. So on the one hand, it is desirable that more money gets put into the market. The other is there is this danger of inflation coming. It's not a very easy choice. I would have found it very difficult to make that choice. So what the government has decided, I'm sure they must have thought over it, to see that it does not hit the inflation as badly. So they are putting money into productive activities. Or if I heard the finance minister correctly, they are drawing from the savings. They are not printing money. So they are not putting additional money. They are trying to create instruments through which more money can come without the paucity of products and services. When you print money, the products or services may or may not come. But if you pull it out from savings or from somewhere, or you create instruments, the products and services are already there for which the money was paid. So you're not creating inflation. So from that point of view, I think there weren't very many choices available with them, and they have gone in for it. Of course, there are many other things that can be done. It's easier. I keep saying that it's the best and easiest to become a Raisa, that is an advisor, because I don't have to face it. But you must understand, and I have said that in my book, that it's very easy to come up with ideas, and these days people are coming with ideas thick and fast. But for any idea to fructify in a country like ours, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, and judicially tenable. Now, to an outsider, it might appear very complex. Indeed, it is very complex. That is why most of the things don't happen in the government, or they happen with fits and starts. They start and suddenly either there's a judicial stay, or their administrative machinery is not there, or the money is lacking. So one has to look into these aspects, and I speak that with experience. Whatever little that one could do, one was conscious of this. So by listing out these 6 aspects, I'm not saying things should not be done. What I'm saying is you must be fully conscious and aware of the ground realities. When you start moving, you will be able to sustain it if you are aware. It is not to inhibit you from doing from what you should be doing, but be aware and conscious that these are the issues that you have to keep in mind for anything. The suggestion that you gave, you have to look into the financial viability. Viability doesn't mean strictly viability, but the financial aspect or the social aspect of a particular decision. So if inflation kicks in, then who's going to be hit? The poorest of the poor. So one has to keep that in mind. Not very easy choice.
No, not it. It is not, Mr. Swaroop. But a printing money or monetization decision is actually more within the ambit of the central bank, not so much what the ruling government might choose to do. I think there's 2 points of criticism for the ruling government. A, the fact that any fiscal support has not been large enough, where at this point it should have been direct cash, going into the hands of the most needy. And B, the idea of actually crunching down on spending, whether it is privatization of PSUs or withdrawing a lot of spending in an environment where the spend should have been larger from the government. So on those two tracks, how do you think this could have been done differently?
No, as I said, I can come up with my own prescription of what government needs to do, but I don't have the expertise enough. I don't claim to be an expert to advise the government on this front. I can suggest, which I have been suggesting, on how to make efficiency, bring about efficiency. If, for example, I have written a lot on this. I, as Secretary Coal, handled in a way Coal India. Now, I'm of the view that if you do certain things, Coal India can be probably the finest because we demonstrated it is. So if you keep Coal India without Chairman Coal India, no matter what you talk in theory, nothing will happen. Imagine what happened to Coal India. In 14, 15, 15, 16, Coal India came out of the mess, created a situation where we were thinking in terms of exporting coal to Bangladesh. And in 2016 onwards, we did not have a chairman for a year. Coal India also doesn't do as well as that. So instead of talking, big theoretical aspect, they should, to me, operational issues can be looked into. And imagine having or not having Chairman Coal India does not have a financial implication directly, because in any case payment has to be made to Chairman Coal India. But the impact it has on the PSU. So, for example, as you also mentioned, if I keep shifting secretaries to Government of India from one place to the other, there's no such direct financial implication, but has a huge implication in terms of policy formulation, implementation. So I have written about it. I have said that the one thing that the government should look into and does not have financial implication is human resource management. If you pick up the right man for the right job and give him that space, then he should be able to deliver. Again, I have written in my book that if you post fools as secretary and then you monitor them every day, nothing will happen. Things will not improve. Post a good person. मैं कहता हूं मजाक में कि आप गधे को बांधिएगा तो उसको रोज आपको लात मारनी पड़ेगी. आप घोड़े को बांधिए, वो अपना काम करेगा. So the point is, I think the focus has to be on human resource management. People have asked me in the context of specialization, and I said nonsense. You get the right man for the right job and leave him alone. In coal sector, I started by spending 24/7 in the office because there was a crisis. In 2 years' time, I had only 45 minutes of work. People ask me, how did you do that? Simple. I got the right people, trusted them, delegated them. They were happy doing what they were doing. I was happy with doing what I was doing, and coal production was happening. Now, if I have the right chairman, Coal of India, I really fought for that chairman. One of the finest officers in the country, Sudhir Bhattacharya, he is singularly responsible for turning around Coal India. Now, I get a lot of credit, but I hardly did, except getting the right guy there and then giving him space. I hardly wrote any letters to him. In fact, the message that I used to send to him, yeah, you will be able to do what you're doing, but if you have a problem, tell me. So we divided our work in a manner that I didn't interfere in his work. The problem is that the government interferes in everything that goes in PSU. I ensured that we did not unnecessarily, trouble Coal India. Let them do the job. So it is, to me, governance is about human resource management. Financial management will happen. If you have the right man, he'll make the right decision. He'll give the right advice. Sometimes I see the problem in that. Because despite 360 degrees that we are talking of, we are unable to get the right. I mean, there are outstanding secretaries even now. I mean, I can name them. Absolutely top class. Sanjay Agarwal, Anita Karwal. I've worked with these guys. They're absolutely outstanding. Right person at the right place. You don't have to tell Anita Agarwal what you need to do in education. She's absolutely perfect there. You don't have to tell Sanjay Agarwal what needs to be done. Perfect. Similar sort of choices need to be made for all ministries and give them space and time. That's what I mean.
So for a sector as large as coal, with as much promise as you pointed out, Mr. Swaroop, given the right man or woman was, doing their job, how do you read the government's decision to open up the coal sector, to put coal blocks up for, auction for commercial mining? I mean, does this help any of the situation? Was this even a problem that needed addressing?
Yes. I, as Secretary Coal, had moved this file. had convinced the Prime Minister into believing that commercial mining should be done. He said yes. But Prime Minister doesn't do everything. Someone has to follow it up. And someone sat on the file and it didn't happen. It happened much later, 4 years down the line. It should have happened in the first, second year. I remember distinctly Arun Jaitley telling Prime Minister in my presence when he agreed with me. He said, प्रधानमंत्री जी आप इसको अभी पहले 2 साल में कर लीजिए क्योंकि उसके बाद शायद कठिनाई आ सकती है. And Prime Minister agreed. He said we should go for commercial mining. I am all for commercial mining. The reason is very simple. You look at the situation in this country. India sits on 300 billion tons of coal. 300 billion tons. Our requirement is only 800 million tons. Now, Coal India being so to say an extension of government has its limitations unless you extend the arm to an extent that you allow Coal India to do. But that normally doesn't happen because almost everyone in the government wants to have a control over PSUs. So you have to have coal from somewhere. There is potential available. There is demand available. Why don't you allow commercial mining to happen? So they allowed it. Now, I have written extensively on how to make this a success. Because without taking states on board, this will not succeed. As luck would have it now. And it happened during my time also. So what did I do? In the 2 years of my existence as Secretary Coal, I didn't convene a single meeting in Delhi. All meetings I used to travel down to the states, meet the Chief Minister, Chief Secretary, go down, meet the district magistrates, get it moving, coal production improve. Same has to happen now. For commercial mining to happen, there are 3 primary problems that I discussed. All 3 primary problems relate to state governments. Actually, I mean, jokingly say, center is a fiction. Actual action is in the physical action is in the states. So you have to have on board. But the irony now is all the coal-bearing states, almost all, are in the opposition group. West Bengal, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Maharashtra are not ruled by India. So you can't ignore them. You have to take them on board. Because if the state governments don't want, no matter what you do, coal mining will not happen. So whereas the decision for commercial mining should have happened long ago, thankfully it has happened now. For it to actually happen on the ground, we have to get the states on board.
Let me draw you to another sector which seems to be wading in through a much bigger crisis, Mr. Swaroop, which is the power sector, where there doesn't seem to have been, a resolution for either side, not for the private companies and not for the government at all. Within that context, a couple of years back came the Grand IBC, which seemed to be a resolution to a lot of these sick companies, and that would be a step forward. But now it seems it is getting diluted step by step. Some kind of resolution committee has been set up, and the sense people get who have a deep understanding of the finance ministry is that IBC is on the back burner and these power companies have basically gotten a free ticket. Does this seem like an issue that needs urgent address, and how would you have done it differently?
I don't know whether you read the chapter Uday in my book. There is a full chapter on power sector.
Yeah.
And someone should sit down and examine that both power and coal were in trouble in 2014. Coal came out of the mess, power didn't. Why it didn't happen? Right. In answer to that question will lie how it can happen. And that is explained in my book, in that chapter, Uday. Why the Uday ka Uday kyun nahi hua? Because they always continue to believe it is happening, whereas it was not happening. I'm on record. I wrote to the then power minister, who also happened to be the coal minister, that why don't you follow the same strategy as has been followed in coal? Why don't you sit down with the state governments and work out a detailed action plan? And I have also written in my book that if one aspect of Gujarat governance that should have been replicated in the country, that was in the power sector. Because in the power sector, Gujarat did extremely well. They found solutions. I distinctly remember in a presentation before the Prime Minister, I had mentioned this and he totally agreed that it has happened in Gujarat. Why can't it happen in other states? And the way to happen it was, and I told the then Power Minister, why can't the officers of Rajasthan government go to Ahmedabad or Gandhinagar, sit with those officers and work out a detailed action plan? We are very fond of policies because they hit headlines. And you get a lot of publicity. In the context of education policy, I told Dr. Kasturi Rangan, please don't unnecessarily waste your time on policy. Get down to an action plan. What needs to be done, how it will be done, who will do it, by when it will be done. Now coming to the question that you raised. In that, we have not fleshed out the how of it. We always come up with diagnosis and some sort of a prescription. But how? The problem is in implementation. So when we announce a policy, as the one that you mentioned, that was a sort of a policy, there should have been a clear-cut action plan associated with it, clearly defining the roles of respective stakeholders. That's extremely important. We don't do that. Even when we define how, we don't say who will do it and by when it will be done and then monitor it. That's how it needs to be done. Now, in the power sector, no one seems to be so committed and engaged with the stakeholders. Now, I keep using the word stakeholders because ultimately the bottom line is getting the stakeholders on board. In this case, who are the stakeholders? You have the state government, you have the GenCos, you have the DISCOMs, you have the coal suppliers. Sit down with them. I'm telling you, in coal, after 3 months, I didn't do anything. I used to call the stakeholders, they used to give me the suggestion. Because when the suggestion came from them, for them to implement it became much easier. Instead of some wisdom, I jokingly say, we all in Delhi believe that all wisdom resides here. It doesn't. There's so much wisdom across the country. If we try and find out, these guys will tell you what to do. When I used to sit with these guys in the power sector as coal secretary, and they used to say, sir, ऐसा क्यों नहीं करते? हमने कहा, करो यार, क्यों नहीं करते? The point is that we try first look for a perfect solution, and there is no perfect solution. If you look at it from the operational point of view, let us go into the, if you have time, I'll explain what is wrong with the power sector. Let's look at it. DISCOMs are in a bad shape. That's where the problem starts. So unless you take care of DISCOMs, and that's where Uday came in, fantastic scheme, very poorly implemented. DISCOMs, if you don't sort them out, GenCos won't sort it out. Because DISCOMs owe around 30,000 crores. This is I'm talking about 6 months ago to GenCos. Now GenCos owe another 15,000 crores to Coal India for coal. So if we are unable to look at DISCOMs by merely talking about other segments, it won't work. So the focus has to be totally DISCOMs. And Uday was the answer, Uday is the answer, and it is not an idea out of somewhere else. The idea has actually worked in Gujarat and to some extent in Chhattisgarh. Let us try and understand how did they make it work and then replicate and scale it. We don't do that. We come up with a new policy, then another policy. I keep telling policy makers, as I did in case of education, try and find solutions that are already there. Try and understand the how of that solution. Then try and replicate, customize and scale the solutions. I don't know, why don't we do that? Why do we want to be absolutely unique and giving ideas, knowing fully well that ideas won't work? So for an idea to work, if we can look at an idea that is already working on the ground, it's much easier to scale it rather than, in education, people used to give me this, sir, why don't you go to England, Finland, Holland, Scotland, New Zealand? So I asked that guy, have you visited motherland? And that's where I found solutions to education there. So we have to look at the existing solutions. I'm not saying they will provide solution for all, but they'll give you the right direction on what to do. And secondly, since they have actually happened on the ground, they will carry more conviction, easier to implement, easier to scale.
Candidly though, Mr. Swaroop, do you think this is also part of dealing with kid gloves with the large private power players? Because, there's only 3 or 4 of them. They happen to be some of the largest businesses in our country. And that seems to be the problem, where loans are taken from banks. The loans are not really used for investment, but for interest repayment. That creates a vicious cycle of its own. And then the solution seems to be, we need a tariff raise, where neither are their bankruptcy problems being addressed, nor frankly are as you said, the root of the problem.
No, first, before you go to the root of the problem, first you have to accept and recognize the existence of a problem. Some of the problem is on account of pushing the problems under the carpet and painting a picture that everything is fine. That's the worst. First is accept. Once you accept the problem, you will probably find a solution. If you don't accept the problem and think that everything is hunky-dory, then obviously the problem will become worse. So in case of power sector, that was the problem to begin with. I distinctly remember my first meeting with the Prime Minister, wherein a presentation was made by the power secretary, who happens to be in a very important position now. So he, in his 6 slides, found coal as the problem for power sector. So Prime Minister's response was, Anil ji, आप coal sector को ठीक कर दिए, देश की आर्थिक स्थिति सुधर जाएगी. That's what he said. So I was very new, but I can't hold my comment. So I told him, sir, I agree with you. Coal may be largely responsible for the power sector, but there are many other issues that beset power sector. So perhaps you may like to look at it comprehensively beyond coal as well. He immediately agreed. He turned around to the power minister and coal minister and said, Anil ji, sahi keh rahe hain. Iska comprehensive aap dekhiye. Now, I'm telling you, I had a number of interactions with the PM. He is a very patient listener. And contrary to the general belief, he likes difference of opinion in a meeting. He may not like it when I speak it outside, but he does like. And on a number of occasions, he agreed with me. But unfortunately, some of us, for whatever reason, do not believe in expressing ourselves in his presence. I know of a number of, and I have written that in my book also, that outside they're agreeing with me, the officers, inside they don't, because they're not sure about the reaction of the Prime Minister. That's the problem. So Prime Minister is Prime Minister is Prime Minister. I can't change him, but I can change myself. Now, if I take the risk of his sometimes wrath in expressing an opinion different from him, then I can get away with it. I got away with it almost every occasion. I had on a number of occasions different opinion with them. I expressed it. Some cases they agreed, some cases disagreed. So be it. But I have to say, I learned it the hard way, not the hard way. If you notice the chapter in the book where the chief secretary was nudging me to keep quiet, and I kept on saying what I was saying, which I was secretary, special secretary to the chief minister. So that's a habit that I cultivated. People say that, I remember in one of the meetings when, and that is again there in my book, when a joint secretary of the PMO asked me after a meeting on health insurance, in which I was as education secretary, gave a briefing to the Prime Minister of 15 minutes, which enabled this Ayushman Bharat to be born. And that chap asked me, sir, आप कैसे बोलते थे? मैंने कहा, देखो मुझे रिटायरमेंट के बाद इनसे कुछ चाहिए नहीं. मैं इनके हित में, सरकार के हित में बोल रहा हूँ. ये असहमत होंगे तो इनकी मतलब, मुझे क्या मतलब है? I don't expect anything from him. What I genuinely feel about an issue, I speak it out. If it works, so be it. Again, I don't believe in changing things. No. They may change. They may. I have to do what I have to say. Rest for him to decide. So I had no expectations from them.
So draw from your book, Mr. Swaroop, and share with anyone who's watching what point was the most either frustrating or scary for you, because it takes a lot of courage to even speak up like that. At what point did you say, okay, this is tough?
No, I don't think I was scared, but I was frustrated on occasions, and that is not there. I thought I would write, but probably it got missed out. I had gone back to UP after a stint in Delhi, and the state was in a mess, terrible mess. Corruption was large, and I recall that written order from my boss, from my minister, I was horticulture secretary, asking me to suspend a deputy director, period. No reason given. But he was competent to suspend me. I didn't know. And then I found out about this officer. I found that he was very honest, very efficient, and I felt helpless. Here's a written order. So I spoke to the minister. He said, "वो मुझसे मिलने नहीं आया." I said, "This is too small a reason." I found out from the officer. He said, "Sir, वो पैसा मांग रहे हैं, मैं नहीं दे रहा हूँ, इसलिए वो नाराज." Now, what do you do in that situation? He is authorized to suspend him. He's given. And I wrote these lines which are not there in the book. संशय नहीं मन में तेरी सृष्टि में या तुझमें, तू ही तू मेरे मन में समाया, सब कुछ मैंने तुझसे है पाया, फिर भी स्तब्ध हूँ, व्याकुल हूँ, अशांत हूँ, शायद अनजान हूँ. क्या यही जीवन है? जो पापी है, दुराचारी है, क्यों जीत रहा निरंतर है? स्पष्ट करो, अभिव्यक्त करो, कुछ तो करो मेरे राम. ये मेरी वेदना थी जो मैंने राम के पल्ले में डाल दी, because I was extremely frustrated. How do I protect this guy? That was one of, not icon scary, it was very frustrating. I was unable to protect. If you read my book, there are occasions that I am unable to protect a few people, and they had to suffer. They were frustrations of my career. But then, as I write in my book also, I sought inspiration from what I could do and what was happening. And in a career, there will be ups and downs, there will be frustrations. It's not that all my career was smooth and straight. No, it was not. It was very frustrating on a number of occasions. But I could come out of that frustration because of the sheer optimism that I had. I had a belief that we can do things irrespective of some problems. Even in this case of this officer, I prevented his suspension. Of course, I was transferred out. That's a different matter. But this guy was not suspended. The written legitimate orders of the minister were stalled. They were not suspended. He was not suspended. For a change, bureaucratic red tape did something good.
Let me swivel to the educational policy that has just been made public a few days back, Mr. Swaroop. And you have said in the past that the most significant of all is the education mafia, bigger than the coal mafia. How did you read the details of the policy? Do you think it has been, all-inclusive? And how easy do you think it's going to be to implement it?
See, I have to look at policy at two levels. One at the conceptual level, the other at the operational level. At the conceptual level, I think it's a fabulous policy. It's so comprehensive, covers every aspect, also covers the aspect of the mafias that I had mentioned. In fact, the policy lays focus on teachers And one of the biggest mafias is the B.Ed and D.El.Ed colleges, and policy talks about a 4-year integrated course that will actually do away with these mafias. So policy is absolutely fabulous. I mean, any expert can't draw a better policy than what it is. But I see a real problem in its implementation. Why? Because I had suggested at that point in time that there have to be some practitioners as a part of this policy formulation committee. Unfortunately, there was no practitioner, there was no principal, no teacher in that. So policy makers came up with brilliant ideas with their feet up from the ground. So they're dreaming with the feet are not on the ground, and hence there would be many problems in implementing the policy. And those 6 aspects that I mentioned will have to be covered. Not those 6, but 2 of them: financial viability and administrative doability. These are things that will trouble the government, because the policy does say 6% of GDP should go to education. This was said by Kothari Commission decades ago, but it has not happened. Now, I can't foresee 6% of GDP coming here. I'm optimistic it may come. If it does come, we'll solve certain problems. But greater problems will come in terms of operation. I'll give you just one example of a brilliant idea, but I right now don't have a way to implement it. Probably they will struggle to do it. Using mother tongue for education from class 1 to 5. Excellent idea. All researchers have actually proved that that's the best way to comprehend, to understand concepts. Nothing better than that. But implementing it would be a bit of a problem, would require a lot of human resource and funds. So it's not doable, but it would require the support, it will require a lot of effort. So for example, how do you manage a class which has multiple mother tongue students in a class? It will be difficult to see. And then wherever they are teaching in a particular language, if you want to switch over to mother tongue, they'll have to get fresh teachers. Do you have those teachers? Do you have the money to pay them? So, I mean, so on and so forth. Similarly, another fantastic idea is that of preschool education, that is nursery and KG and all, which is not happening in government right now. That's a brilliant idea. But they talk in terms of specialized teachers. Usual teachers cannot teach children of that age.
Yeah.
Now, how do you get those teachers? Where is the money to back them? So the ideas are brilliant, but operationally we'll have to see the administrative doability and financial viability of each of the ideas. As I said, I'm an optimist. It can be worked out. It should be worked out in the interest of this country. The ideas are brilliant in the policy. Let's hope and pray we are able to find some money. We are able to find the people who are able to implement the ideas.
We do indeed. My final question to you, Mr. Swaroop, as someone who's dedicated his life to being a civil servant and would like to be reborn as one, how do you read this increasing use of enforcement agencies and constitutional stroke legal bodies for what looks like maximizing personal political gains? It has been on the uptrend. It's visible to everyone what's happening with several of these quasi-legal agencies or legal agencies. How do you feel?
See, again, it's very unfortunate. What is happening is not in the interest of democracy. It's not in the interest finally, because it sends wrong signals around. But as I keep saying, that is not something which I am doing, or I cannot do, or I can do something about it. I can't. My challenge would be, how do I adjust to these changed set of circumstances where some of these things are happening? That's the challenge that I look at myself. What should I do? What can I do? How do I adjust myself in these circumstances and continue to do what I am doing? So I would rather be engaged in that than be troubled by what is happening around me. Because as I keep saying, I have absolutely no control over what the politician does, what he wants to do. Do I? I don't think so. I don't think anyone has. So it's more of, from that perspective, it's more of an academic discussion. But looking at what is happening around, I have to see how do I evolve as a civil servant or as an individual to respond to that. That is a challenge that probably each one of us faces now.
Very fair point. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, Mr. Swaroop. For anyone watching, Mr. Swaroop's book is out called Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. It's full of many interesting anecdotes, I think, about the life and challenges of a civil servant. And I do appreciate your time today for joining in and speaking with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.